They set a trap for a single mom and an autistic man, and his calm reaction exposed everything. Would you tell the truth if it could cost you everything? Elena's apartment in Cleveland carried the kind of cold that didn't feel seasonal, but personal, as if the building itself had decided warmth was for people who could afford it. She moved quietly so her son wouldn't wake, stepping around a patch of peeling linoleum like it was a sleeping animal. The kitchen light flickered twice before staying on, and she held her breath the way people do when they're hoping a small mercy won't change its mind. On the table sat an envelope with her name printed too boldly, the kind that never contained good news, and she didn't open it yet because dread was easier when it stayed folded. She brewed the cheapest coffee she could find, and the smell tried to pretend everything was normal. The mug warmed her hands, but not her thoughts. Elena stared at the calendar where she'd circled court-related dates in a careful red, the ink pressing into the paper like a bruise. One missed payment could become a question of stability, and stability was a word that sounded objective until someone used it to measure a mother's love. She thought about how a judge might look at her worn coat and her tired eyes and decide her child deserved a different kind of life. Her son, Liam, padded into the kitchen with hair sticking up and sleep still clinging to his cheeks. He climbed into a chair too big for him and watched her face the way kids do when they're learning the weather inside a person. Elena forced a smile that used the muscles but not the relief, then added extra milk to his cereal to make it feel like abundance. Liam pointed to the envelope and asked what it was, and she answered too fast. Just boring grown-up stuff, as if boredom could protect him. He accepted it, but his gaze lingered, sensing the lie the way a finger senses a crack in glass. After he left for school, Elena stood at the sink and let the faucet run longer than she should have, listening to the water because it didn't judge her. She thought of her own mother, who used to say shame was like mold. It grew in the dark and spread quietly. Elena had promised herself she would never let her child feel that kind of rot. Yet here she was, hiding overdue notices in a drawer like contraband. When she finally opened the envelope, the words inside didn't shout. They simply stated reality with cold grammar, and she felt her throat tighten anyway. Across town, Jonah followed his routine with the devotion of someone who had been punished for improvising. Same bus, same seat if it was available, same playlist at the same volume. He wore headphones not to enjoy music, but to create a boundary the world couldn't step over. People called him distant, but distance was sometimes the only way his nervous system stayed quiet enough to function. In his pocket he carried a small folded note written in steady handwriting. Breathe. Count. Keep going. He touched it like a charm, because it reminded him his body wasn't the enemy, just easily overwhelmed. At the bus stop, Jonah noticed two men standing under an ad for a family law firm, their shoes too clean for the slushy sidewalk. They weren't doing anything obvious. That was the problem. Their stillness felt intentional, like a pause placed in the wrong sentence. Jonah's mind tried to file it under coincidence, but his brain held on to patterns the way some people held on to grudges. One of the men glanced at him, then away, then back again, as if confirming an image. Jonah's stomach tightened, and he adjusted his headphones even though the music was already loud enough. Elena spent the afternoon calling numbers she didn't want to call, listening to automated voices that apologized without meaning it. Each, "Please hold," felt like a small lesson in her place in the world. She tried one more time to negotiate, to explain that she worked, that she was trying, that she wasn't irresponsible, just outpaced. The person on the line didn't sound cruel, only indifferent, and indifference cut deeper because it didn't even require effort. When Elena hung up, her hands trembled with a helpless energy, like her body wanted to run somewhere her life couldn't follow. Her phone buzzed near evening, and she expected another reminder, another warning, another quiet threat wrapped in polite words. Instead, the message on the screen felt strangely bright, an offer for a paid community support errand, short and simple, promising enough money to cover what she owed. Elena stared at it too long, waiting for the catch to reveal itself, because good luck had never found her address before. She reread the lines, noticing how the sender never used her name, only you, as if whoever wrote it didn't need to know her to choose her. A part of her wanted to delete it immediately, but another part heard Liam's laugh and imagined keeping his room. When Elena didn't respond, another message arrived, gentler, almost caring. No judgment, just help. The words hit a tender place, the one that wanted to believe adults could be kind without wanting something back. Her brain did what brains do under stress. It narrowed the world to one solution, one door, one chance. She told herself she would ask questions, that she would stay smart, that she would walk away if anything felt wrong. Still, her thumb hovered, because survival sometimes looks like agreeing before you understand. She typed, "What does it involve?" and felt her heart thump as if it had just made a decision without her. Jonah stepped off the bus with the same uneasy feeling, as if the air behind him had weight. He saw the two men again, now across the street, not close enough to be a threat, but close enough to be present. His mind flashed through possible explanations, neighbors, commuters, coincidence, but the pattern stayed. He remembered all the times people had assumed things about him. Dangerous, unstable, odd. Jonah hated how easily stories formed around someone who didn't speak the right social language. He walked faster, trying to return to the safety of predictability, yet his thoughts kept circling one question he couldn't quiet. Who was being watched? And why? Elena picked Liam up from school and smiled too much, asking about his day with a brightness that felt borrowed. Liam talked about a drawing he made, then asked if they could get pizza, sometime soon, as if he already knew no was waiting in her mouth. Elena promised soon, even though promises had become a currency she was running out of. When they got home, she found herself staring at the message again, the offer glowing like a small doorway in a hallway of locked doors. She didn't tell Liam, because children shouldn't carry adult gambles, but her silence felt like a secret growing teeth. Later, after Liam fell asleep, Elena listened to the building settle, pipes knocking, someone arguing softly through the wall, a TV laughing in another apartment. She opened the message thread again, and this time it turned into a call from a woman with a warm voice that sounded practiced, like comfort with sharp edges sanded down. The woman spoke about a program and support and how hard it must be, and Elena felt her chest ache with the strange pain of being seen by a stranger. Then the woman said the errand would be easier if Elena didn't go alone, and she suggested, almost casually, that Elena bring someone noticeable. Elena's fingers tightened around the phone, because that request didn't sound like help. It sounded like a plan that needed a prop. Before Elena could ask why, the woman added softly, "It'll make things smoother," and the line went quiet for a beat too long, as if waiting for Elena to accept the logic without receiving the explanation. Elena swallowed, hearing her own fear like a distant alarm she'd learned to ignore. She looked at Liam's bedroom door, then at the overdue notice on the table, then back at the phone that still held the woman's number like a fingerprint. She realized she didn't even know who this woman was, only how badly Elena needed her to be real. And in that silence, Elena understood the most frightening part. She had already been pulled halfway into something she couldn't yet name. Do you think Elena should trust that call, or does someone noticeable feel like a warning sign? Put your guess down in the comments below the video. Elena barely slept. Her mind kept replaying the phrase, someone noticeable, the way a tongue worries a sore tooth, returning to it even when it hurts. In the morning, she packed Liam's lunch with careful hands and an unsteady chest, as if the simple act could prove she was still a good mother. When he left, she sat at the table and wrote 2 columns on scrap paper. Reasons to ignore the call, reasons to answer it. The second column filled faster, and that scared her most. She called the number back during her break at work, hiding in a narrow hallway that smelled like cleaning spray and burnt toast. The same warm voice answered immediately, like she'd been waiting with the phone in her hand. She introduced herself as Marla and spoke in soothing phrases that sounded like they'd been tested on frightened people before. Elena noticed how Marla never paused long enough for questions to grow teeth. Every time Elena tried to ask, "Who are you exactly?" Marla slid around it with another reassurance and a tiny compliment, like offering candy to keep a child from crying. Marla said the program partnered with local businesses that donated funds for short community tasks, and Elena's brain tried to picture the organization behind the words. Nothing came. When Elena asked for a website, Marla laughed lightly and said their online presence was being updated, as if that was normal, as if charity had the luxury of being vague. Elena felt heat rise in her face, part suspicion, part humiliation for even needing this. Still, Marla said a number that made Elena's throat tighten, enough to cover rent and the fee she'd been avoiding. Marla suggested a meeting somewhere public, then named a community center across town, the kind with cheerful banners that promised resources and hope. Elena agreed, then instantly regretted it, as if she'd signed something invisible. Marla told her to bring a form of ID and to dress comfortable, which sounded harmless until Marla added, almost as an afterthought, "And bring that noticeable person, okay?" Elena asked what noticeable meant, and Marla's answer came too quick. Just someone people remember. That was not an explanation. It was a strategy. On the bus ride home, Elena's senses sharpened into vigilance. Every glance felt heavier, every laugh too pointed, every phone camera a possible witness. Stress did that. It convinced the brain that danger hid in ordinary faces, because the brain preferred false alarms to missed threats. Elena tried to slow her breathing, but her thoughts ran ahead, building scenes she didn't want to watch. She imagined walking into the community center and realizing she'd misunderstood everything. She also imagined not going, and watching Liam's life collapse into a judge's paperwork. That evening, Jonah stopped at the same corner store he always stopped at, because routine made the world predictable. He bought the same mint gum and the same bottled water, then froze when he saw something new taped beside the register. A flyer with a smiling family and the words, "Community Support Day," printed in bold. The address matched the community center Marla had named. Jonah stared too long, feeling his skin tighten with the wrong kind of awareness. He didn't know why it mattered, only that his body reacted as if it did. Outside, the air bit his cheeks, and he noticed a woman across the street taking a photo. Of the flyer, maybe, or the storefront, or him. She lowered her phone quickly, like someone caught touching a bruise. Jonah's mind catalogued her. Gray scarf, neat hair, shoes too clean for winter slush. The same detail as before. Too clean. He didn't follow her, because following meant escalation, and escalation meant chaos. Instead, he walked home faster than his usual pace, hating how his heart tried to outrun his logic. Elena spent the night doing laundry in the bathtub, pressing shirts flat with her palms because the dryer downstairs ate quarters like it was hungry. While the fabric soaked, she practiced what she would say at the community center. Calm sentences, respectable tone, the kind that made people take her seriously. She hated that she had to rehearse dignity. Shame wasn't just a feeling, it was a posture, a way of shrinking so no one could accuse you of taking up space. She looked at her reflection in the dark window and wondered if anyone would help her if she looked less tired. The next morning, Elena walked Liam to school and tried not to watch the street too closely. She failed. A car idled near the curb, engine humming, headlights off, driver unseen. It could have been anyone waiting for a kid, anyone warming up their vehicle, anyone with a normal reason. But Elena's brain, already primed by fear, stitched the image into a pattern. She felt her pulse climb, and the sound of the engine became a low, patient warning. When she glanced back after crossing the road, the car rolled forward slowly, too slowly. At work, Elena found herself making small mistakes, mixing up orders, forgetting words mid-sentence. Her manager frowned, not cruelly, but with the tired impatience of someone who didn't have room for other people's crises. Eleanor apologized too much, then bit her tongue to stop, because over-apologizing was a kind of confession. During lunch, she searched the name Marla gave for the program. Nothing. Not a single trace that felt legitimate. Her hands went cold as her phone refreshed again and again, showing emptiness where proof should be. She almost convinced herself to cancel. Then a memory rose up. Liam asking for pizza, sometime soon, like he'd learned to ask for joy gently. Elena pictured telling him they had to move again, that the new place might be farther from his school, that his teacher's name would become a past tense. The moral weight settled in her chest. Protect him from risk now, or protect him from loss later. Both choices carried harm. That was how pressure worked. It offered two wounds and called one of them responsibility. That afternoon, Jonah sat at his kitchen table with the lights off, because bright light felt like sand in his eyes when he was anxious. He opened his laptop and typed the community center address. Photos appeared. Happy volunteers, donated coats, smiling faces. It looked real. That made it worse. Predators didn't always build dark rooms. Sometimes they borrowed bright ones. Jonah read reviews, noticing how many sounded unusually similar, as if written by the same careful hand. He felt the familiar loneliness of seeing a pattern others didn't, and the fear of being dismissed if he spoke. Jonah's phone buzzed with a notification from a neighborhood group chat he rarely checked. Someone had posted about a support initiative at the community center, encouraging people to attend, especially families in transition. The phrase "in transition" stabbed Jonah's attention. It sounded like a kind way to name people who could be pushed. He stared at the screen until his eyes watered, then typed a short reply and deleted it, typed again and deleted it again, trapped between caution and responsibility. He finally sent one sentence: "Be careful with personal information." The message looked small against the tide of cheerful replies. Elena's phone rang while she was walking home, and Marla's warm voice slid into her ear like a hand on her shoulder. "Just confirming tomorrow," Marla said. "And remember, bring that noticeable friend." Elena forced herself to ask, "Why?" Marla paused, just long enough for Elena to feel the shape of something hidden, then answered softly, "Because people listen when they see a story they recognize." Elena stopped on the sidewalk, the world rushing past her, and realized Marla wasn't talking about help. She was talking about an audience. And Elena suddenly needed to know who exactly was writing this story around her. Elena arrived at Liam's school early, not because she had time, but because waiting at home made her thoughts too loud. She watched parents cluster in small circles, trading weekend plans and complaints like harmless coins. Her chest felt tight with the private knowledge that her life had no spare change. When Liam ran to her, backpack bouncing, she hugged him longer than usual. He wiggled and laughed, then looked up, studying her face as if trying to read a word she refused to say. On the walk back, Elena spotted Jonah near the crosswalk, standing slightly apart from the crowd, shoulders tense under a plain jacket. He wasn't doing anything dramatic. He simply looked like someone bracing for the world to touch him. Liam's small toy slipped from his pocket and rolled across the sidewalk, stopping right by Jonah's shoe. Jonah froze, eyes flicking down, then up, like he needed permission to move. Elena softened her voice without thinking, the way you do around a skittish animal that deserves gentleness, not fear. Jonah crouched slowly and picked up the toy with careful fingers, as if sudden movements might break the moment. He placed it in Liam's palm instead of handing it directly, giving the child a choice, an exit, control. Liam smiled and said thank you. Jonah nodded once, a tiny motion that felt like a door opening a crack. Elena noticed his hands trembled, not from weakness but from effort, and something in her, old empathy, old exhaustion, recognized it. She realized she didn't feel threatened by him. She felt safe. Elena started to walk away, but Marla's words pressed against her ribs. Someone noticeable. Jonah was noticeable in the way a quiet fire is noticeable once you see it. Steady, different, hard to ignore. Elena turned back before courage evaporated and asked, almost whispering, if he could do her a favor. She explained there was a meeting at a community center, that she didn't want to go alone, that she just needed someone nearby. Jonah's eyes flicked to the street, then to Elena, then to Liam, as if his brain was calculating risk in fast, silent math. Jonah didn't answer right away. Elena watched him struggle with the decision, saw how the question pulled him between self-protection and decency. People often assumed his hesitation meant rudeness, but Elena recognized something else. Overload, the body's alarm system taking the wheel. She added quickly that he wouldn't have to talk, wouldn't have to stay long, wouldn't have to do anything but exist beside her. The offer was oddly respectful, and Jonah's shoulders dropped a fraction, like someone had finally spoken his language. He asked carefully what the meeting was for. Elena hesitated, because admitting need felt like exposing skin in winter. She said it was a support program, then immediately hated how vague she sounded, as if she were lying. Jonah's gaze sharpened, not suspicious of her, but alert to the shape of hidden things. He told her he'd seen a flyer for the same event, and that online reviews felt patterned. The word landed heavy. Patterned. Elena felt a chill that wasn't from the air. She asked if he thought it was dangerous, and Jonah said, "Not loud dangerous, quiet dangerous." Elena almost laughed at the phrase, because it sounded strange, until she understood exactly what he meant. Quiet danger was paperwork, smiles, forms that asked the wrong questions, videos cut to remove context. The kind of harm that didn't bruise skin, but still stole lives. Elena looked down at Liam, who was humming to himself, unaware, and the moral dilemma rose again. Walk away from a chance at stability, or walk into something she couldn't name. Jonah watched her face and seemed to notice the way fear tried to turn into determination, like a flame searching for oxygen. They agreed to meet the next day outside the community center. As Elena turned to leave, Jonah spoke again, voice low. He said if anyone tried to separate her from her child, she should refuse, no matter how polite they sounded. Elena's stomach knotted because the warning felt too specific, like someone who had learned from pain. She wanted to ask what happened to him, but she didn't. People carried stories the way they carried scars. You didn't grab them without permission. Still, she felt a new thread of trust tie itself between them. That evening, Elena dressed in comfortable clothes like Marla instructed, but she chose her oldest coat, the one with the frayed cuff, as if honesty could protect her. She packed Liam's water bottle and a snack, then stopped, realizing how odd it was to bring a child to something that might be a trap. She texted Marla to ask if children were expected. Marla replied almost instantly, "Of course. Families make the story real." Elena stared at the word story until it stopped looking like letters. Her hands went numb, then hot with anger. Jonah prepared in his own way. He laid out his bus pass, his headphones, his folded note. Then he added a small notebook and a pen, because writing facts calmed him when emotions surged. He practiced a sentence in the mirror, just one, something he could say if his voice failed him. "Please explain that again." It sounded harmless, but it was a tool, a way to force clarity into the fog. He remembered times people talked around him, using confusion like a leash. He promised himself he wouldn't be led. Morning brought brittle sunlight and sharp wind. Elena arrived early, Liam holding her hand in a mittened grip that made her ache. Jonah stood near the entrance, slightly turned away from the doors as if avoiding the sensory storm inside. He nodded at Elena, then glanced at Liam and gave a small, careful smile. Elena felt the tension in her chest loosen. For a second, she believed this could be simple. Then she noticed a woman across the street lift her phone, angle it toward them, and lower it again when Elena looked back. Inside the lobby, volunteers wore bright shirts and brighter smiles. A table offered cookies and pamphlets, the kind designed to look hopeful from far away. Elena's eyes scanned the papers, noticing how many photos showed grateful mothers and phrases like turning points and fresh starts. Jonah hovered beside her, silent but intensely present, his gaze moving in quick, precise jumps. A volunteer approached and greeted Elena by name, even though Elena hadn't introduced herself. Elena felt her stomach drop. Jonah's head turned sharply, as if a bell had rung only he could hear. The volunteer handed Elena a clipboard with forms and pointed to a line that asked for her child's full name, school, and additional needs. Elena's throat tightened. The question looked innocent, but it felt like a hook. Jonah leaned in, eyes fixed on the paper, and whispered, "Why do they need that?" The volunteer's smile didn't change, but her eyes hardened for a split second, like a mask slipping. She said it was just for resources. Elena's pen hovered above the page, caught between hope and instinct, and she realized Jonah was right. This wasn't about help. This was about data. Elena tried to ask more questions, but another volunteer gently guided her toward a hallway, saying a coordinator wanted to fast-track her. Jonah took a step forward, then stopped himself, breathing hard through his nose like the air had turned thick. Elena saw the effort it took him to stay calm, and she understood the trap Marla wanted: overwhelm him, label him, dismiss him. Jonah looked at Elena and spoke with sudden clarity. "Don't go alone." Before Elena could respond, a door down the hall swung open, revealing a small room with a ring light and a phone on a tripod, already recording. Elena stopped so fast Liam bumped into her coat. The open door showed a tidy little room pretending to be casual. 2 chairs angled toward each other, a neutral backdrop, a bright light aimed at face level, and a phone staring like an unblinking eye. No one had said anything about interviews. The volunteer's hand hovered near Elena's elbow, gentle but guiding, the kind of touch that could be explained as helpful or controlling, depending on who told the story later. Elena felt her mouth go dry, because her life was already hard without becoming content. Jonah's body reacted before his words did. His shoulders lifted, his jaw tightened, and he took a half step back as if the brightness in that room could burn. Elena saw the effort in him, the fight to keep his system from tipping into overload. The volunteer noticed it too, and her smile widened with a strange satisfaction, like she'd predicted this exact response. Elena's brain flashed a warning. They wanted Jonah to look unstable. They wanted her to look desperate. Together, they could be edited into anything. A woman appeared in the doorway, not in a volunteer shirt, but in a blazer that said corporate confidence. She introduced herself as Donna and spoke with the ease of someone used to being obeyed. "We like to record success stories," she said, voice warm, eyes cool. Elena asked where the footage would go. Donna laughed softly, as if Elena were charmingly naive, and said it was internal, just for donors, just for transparency. The word transparency felt like a joke with teeth, because the only transparent thing in the room was the intention. Elena tightened her grip on Liam's hand. Liam leaned into her leg, sensing the shift in her body the way children sense weather changes before adults admit it. Jonah stared at the phone on the tripod, then at Dana, then at the forms on the clipboard. His eyes moved fast, collecting pieces. Dana kept talking, telling Elena how brave she was, how inspiring, how people needed to see her journey. It sounded flattering, but it also sounded like ownership, like Elena's hardship was a product that required packaging. Elena's shame flared, then turned into anger, sharp and clean. Elena said she didn't want to be recorded. Dana nodded like she respected boundaries, then slid around the refusal without pushing, at least not openly. "Of course," Dana said. "We can blur faces." Elena asked if they could simply not film. Dana's smile thinned. "Donors respond to real people," she said, and the room suddenly felt less like a support center and more like a sales office. Jonah's hands trembled at his sides, but his voice came out steady. "You didn't ask for consent," he said. The volunteer's eyes flicked to him, annoyed. Dana turned her attention to Jonah with practiced curiosity. "And you are?" she asked, as if his presence was a disruption she needed to label. Elena introduced him quickly, hoping to keep the tone neutral. Dana's eyebrows lifted in a way that pretended to be friendly. "How wonderful," she said. "A neurodiversity ally." The phrase sounded like a compliment, yet it landed like a tag. Elena felt the trap tighten. Jonah was becoming a talking point. The same way she was becoming a single mom story. They weren't people here. They were categories. Jonah looked at the ring light again and squinted. Bright light, close quarters, the smell of cookies and cleaning spray mixing in the air. His senses stacked up like plates about to topple. He pressed his thumb into his palm, a grounding habit he didn't explain to anyone. Elena watched him and realized something painful. The world demanded Jonah perform calmness to be treated with dignity, while it demanded she perform gratitude to be treated with help. Both performances were exhausting. Dana stepped closer and lowered her voice. "This won't take long," she said, as if speed could substitute for permission. Elena asked about the errand Marla promised, the money, the rent. Dana's expression flickered, just a microsecond, then returned to smooth. "We'll discuss eligibility after intake," she said, and pointed to the clipboard again. Eligibility, intake, words that sounded official enough to silence objections. Elena's brain latched onto the neuroscience of it without knowing the name. Authority language short-circuited doubt, especially when fear already narrowed her choices. She could feel herself slipping toward compliance simply because resistance required energy she didn't have. They led Elena toward the interview room anyway, not by force, but by momentum. Jonah followed, then stopped at the threshold like an invisible line cut across his feet. Dana noticed and sighed, a tiny sound that carried judgment. "Is he going to be a problem?" she asked Elena, not Jonah, as if he weren't fully human in the conversation. Elena felt heat rush to her face. The cruelty wasn't loud, it was administrative. It was the kind that could be denied later. Elena wanted to defend Jonah, but she also feared losing whatever help this place might offer, and she hated herself for that split-second hesitation. Jonah heard the word problem and flinched like it had weight. He swallowed, eyes darting, and Elena saw how the room's attention sharpened on him, waiting for a crack, waiting to film it. He forced his gaze to Elena, anchoring himself in her face. "She said, 'Bring someone people remember,'" Jonah whispered. "That means they're building a narrative." Elena's stomach dropped because he said the quiet part out loud, and Dana's smile faltered again. For the first time, Elena saw irritation underneath the polish. She realized Jonah wasn't just a witness. He was an obstacle. Dana clapped her hands once, cheerful, like a teacher calling a class to order. "Let's keep things positive," she said. Then she leaned down to Liam's level and asked his name sweetly. Liam hesitated, looking at Elena for permission, and Elena's protective instinct surged. She answered for him, and Dana's eyes lingered on Elena's response as if noting control dynamics. Elena suddenly imagined a courtroom, imagined a clip of her refusing cooperation, imagined someone saying she was hostile, unfit, unstable. Her fear shifted from rent to custody, and it tasted like metal. Elena asked for a printed consent form. Dana said they'd handle it after, and that single word "after" rang like an alarm. Jonah reached into his pocket and pulled out his small notebook, flipping it open with shaking fingers. He began writing names, times, details, because writing turned chaos into sequence. A volunteer stepped closer, peering at the page. "You can't write down staff names," she said sharply, as if privacy only mattered for them. Jonah didn't look up. "Then stop acting like you're doing something you'd regret being documented," he replied, voice quiet but firm. The air shifted. Dana's friendliness drained away, replaced by a colder efficiency. She signaled to another staff member with a glance, and suddenly the hallway felt narrower, crowded. Elena sensed a social trap forming. Isolate her, overwhelm Jonah, push Liam into discomfort, then label their reactions. She realized the danger here wasn't violence, it was interpretation. It was a story told about them, without them, that could follow Eleanor into court and follow Jonah into every future interaction. And just as Eleanor opened her mouth to leave, Marla's voice came from behind them, soft as velvet. "There you are. I knew you'd come." Marla looked even kinder in person, like someone who collected other people's trust and wore it as perfume. She stepped beside Elena with a familiarity that hadn't been earned, touching Elena's shoulder lightly as if claiming connection. "You're safe here," she murmured. But the words landed wrong, because safety didn't need to be announced. Elena noticed Marla's nails, perfectly manicured, and the sharp contrast between that polish and the thrifted coats of the families waiting nearby. Hope had a budget in this building, and it wasn't evenly spent. Dana's tone shifted the moment Marla arrived, almost deferential, like Marla had rank. Elena's brain caught the incongruence and wouldn't let it go. If this was a community center event, why did it suddenly feel like a company hierarchy revealing itself? Jonah watched Marla with narrowed eyes, his gaze snagging on small details. The lanyard turned backward so the name badge couldn't be read, the way she stood blocking Elena's view of the hallway, the way her smile never reached the muscles around her eyes. Jonah's instincts weren't dramatic, they were precise. Marla spoke directly to Liam next, voice syrup-sweet. "And you must be the reason she's so strong," she said. Liam's face lit up for half a second. Children love praise. Then he glanced at Elena again, checking if the warmth was safe. Elena felt something twist inside her. Praise could be a gift, but it could also be a tool, and Elena had lived long enough to know the difference depended on what came next. Marla offered Liam a small sticker from her pocket, already peeled and ready. Elena wondered why she carried them, and why it felt rehearsed. Marla guided them into a side office that looked less like support and more like a polished meeting room. A framed mission statement hung on the wall, the words so broad they could mean anything. "We don't want you overwhelmed," Marla said, closing the door with a soft click. That click felt final. Jonah stayed near the doorway, not sitting, not relaxing, his body choosing vigilance over comfort. Elena sat because she didn't want to appear difficult, then hated herself for the reflex. Fear trained people to cooperate with their own discomfort. Marla slid a folder across the table with Elena's name typed neatly on the front. Elena's throat tightened. She hadn't given her last name today. She hadn't signed anything. Jonah noticed too, and his fingers pressed hard into the notebook in his pocket. Marla opened the folder as if it were ordinary, pointing to sections labeled Housing Stability, Employment Reliability, and Public Perception Risk. Elena stared at the last phrase, stunned. Public perception was not something a charity needed to evaluate. Public perception was something a brand protected. Elena asked carefully where they got her information. Marla's smile stayed gentle as her answer avoided the center of the question. "We work with partners," she said, "and we're very connected." Connected sounded like a brag, not a reassurance. Elena felt her pulse rise, and with it came the old shame. How easy it was to track a person who had no power. Jonah's voice came out low. "What partners?" he asked. Marla tilted her head as if he were adorable, then said, "Oh, you know, community stakeholders." A non-answer dressed up as expertise. Dana entered without knocking, holding a tablet. "We're ready to capture the testimonial," she said brightly. Elena's stomach dropped. Marla raised a hand, pretending to advocate. "Not yet," she told Dana, then turned to Elena with practiced empathy. "But it would help," Marla added, "if you could share how hard it's been. People need to feel it." Elena heard the manipulation in the phrasing. If you refuse, you're denying help to other struggling mothers. If you agree, you give them content. It was a moral trap wrapped in compassion. Elena's mind searched for a clean choice and found none. Jonah stepped forward slightly. "If this is help," he said, You can help without filming. Dana's mouth tightened. Marla's expression didn't change, but something colder surfaced in her eyes, a flash of annoyance quickly buried. Elena watched that micro-expression and felt a new certainty bloom. They were managing emotions the way a salesperson managed objections. Marla leaned toward Elena, lowering her voice. "Listen," she said. "I know you're tired, but this is how you secure support. People don't fund silence." Elena wondered what kind of person said that, and still called it charity. Marla then slid a single-page agreement toward Elena, turning it so the signature line faced her like a command. The text was dense, full of soft-sounding permissions: image use, data sharing, third-party affiliates. Elena's brain, under stress, wanted to skim and sign just to end the discomfort. That was the psychology of pressure: shorten the timeline, increase the shame, offer relief in exchange for consent. Jonah reached out, not touching the paper, just pointing. "This says they can edit your words," he said. Elena felt her stomach flip. Edited words could become a weapon. Elena asked if she could take the form home to review. Marla's warmth cooled by a degree. "We can't hold funds without processing today," she said, and the phrase "hold funds" sounded less like charity and more like a bank. Elena thought of rent, thought of court dates, thought of Liam's teacher's face when she asked about after-school programs she couldn't afford. Her vision narrowed. She hated how her life had been designed to make desperation look like consent. Jonah watched her breathing change and spoke softly. "Delay is protection." The gentleness in his voice made Elena's eyes sting. Marla switched tactics. She looked at Jonah with a polite, clinical smile. "We also provide training for caregivers of individuals with special needs," she said, as if Jonah were a child or a burden. Elena felt rage flare. Jonah's nostrils flared, but he stayed controlled, as if he'd learned long ago that any emotion could be framed as proof against him. "I'm not your program," Jonah replied. "I'm a person." Marla's eyes flicked to Elena, silently asking, "Is he going to ruin this?" Elena realized they wanted her to choose between help and solidarity. Elena surprised herself. She pushed the paper back. Her hands shook, but her voice came out steady. "If you want to help," she said, "give me the details in writing. No filming, no rush." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that exposed who held power. Dana tapped her tablet impatiently. Marla's smile returned, but it looked thinner now, stretched. "Okay," Marla said slowly. "We can do that." Then she added almost casually, "But we'll need to verify your situation, including your child's school attendance." Elena felt her blood go cold. That wasn't verification. That was leverage. Jonah's head snapped up. Elena's mind raced, picturing phone calls to the school, rumors, notes in files. She saw how easily concern could become investigation, how quickly support could become surveillance. Liam swung his legs under the chair, unaware, humming a tune from class. Elena realized she couldn't let this room define her motherhood. She stood, lifting Liam gently, and said they were leaving. Marla didn't stand in their way. She didn't have to. She only said softly, "If you walk out, Elena, don't be surprised when the story finds you anyway." Outside, the winter air hit Elena like reality. She wanted to cry, but crying felt unsafe in public, like giving the world footage for free. Jonah walked beside her, silent, his hands shaking harder now that the immediate threat was gone. Elena looked down at her phone and saw a new notification from an unknown account. A short video clip thumbnail of her entering the community center, frozen mid-step, Liam's face visible. The caption beneath it read, "Is this the kind of mother who deserves sympathy?" Elena's knees went weak because the trap had already started spreading. Elena didn't feel the sidewalk under her feet. The thumbnail kept flashing in her mind like a bruise you can't stop touching. Her first instinct was to report it, to make it disappear, as if deleting a post could erase the fear it had planted. But fear wasn't logical. It was protective, ancient, loud. She tightened her grip on Liam's mitten and kept walking, because stopping would mean thinking, and thinking would mean falling apart in public. Jonah asked if she wanted to go somewhere quiet. His voice was careful, like he was placing each word on a table and stepping back so it wouldn't overwhelm her. Elena nodded, unable to trust her own speech. They went to a small library a few blocks away, where the air smelled like paper and old carpets, and no one demanded smiles. Elena chose a corner table near a window and sat with her back to the wall. Her body wanted angles, exits, control. Liam wandered to the children's area and began flipping through picture books. Elena watched him the way a thirsty person watches water, relieved it exists, terrified it might be taken away. Jonah sat across from her, not too close, giving her space the way he wished the world gave him. Elena opened the unknown account again and saw more comments appearing. People she'd never met spoke as if they'd known her for years. Scammer. Lazy. Weaponizing her kid. The cruelty felt casual, like entertainment. Elena's hands shook as she scrolled. A part of her brain tried to fight back with facts. She worked, she cared, she tried. Another part whispered the darker truth. Facts rarely win against a story people enjoy. The post wasn't just an attack. It was a frame. Once framed, everything she did could be twisted to fit. If she got angry, she was unstable. If she stayed calm, she was guilty. Jonah watched her face and said softly, "This is reputational sabotage." The phrase sounded clinical, but the pain underneath it was human. Elena texted her friend from work, asking if she'd seen anything online. The reply came fast. "Yes. People are sharing it. Boss is mad." Elena's stomach dropped. Employment wasn't just money. It was evidence. Proof she was reliable. Proof she deserved her own child. Elena pictured a custody hearing where someone played that clip and let strangers' comments speak louder than her life. Her chest tightened until breathing felt like pushing through a narrow door. Jonah leaned forward and asked, "Do you know who posted it first?" Elena shook her head. Jonah didn't grab her phone. He didn't demand. He just asked permission with his eyes, then pointed to details, the angle, the distance, the timestamp. "Someone was waiting outside," he said. Elena remembered the woman across the street lifting her phone. The memory hit like ice water. This wasn't accidental, it was arranged, and Elena felt the humiliating sting of being predictable to people who hunted predictability. Elena wanted to call Marla and scream. Instead, she called, voice trembling, trying to sound controlled. Marla answered on the second ring. "Elena," she said warmly, like they were friends. Elena demanded to know why she was being filmed. Marla sighed, as if Elena were exhausting. "We don't control what the public posts," Marla said, "but you do understand how optics work, right?" Optics. Elena heard the admission hiding inside the word. Marla wasn't denying. She was instructing. Marla's tone softened again. "I can help you fix this," she said, "but you have to cooperate." Elena's stomach turned. The offer sounded like a fireman who lit the match offering a hose. "How?" Elena asked, hating herself for needing to know. Marla said there was a restorative segment they could record. Elena tearfully sharing gratitude, Jonah supporting, the center saving them. "It'll calm people down," Marla promised. Elena pictured herself crying on command for donors like a trained animal. The shame was immediate and hot. Jonah listened, jaw clenched, eyes down, absorbing every word through Elena's side of the call. When Elena hung up, Jonah spoke quietly. "They're trying to make you choose the easiest path," he said. "Because when people are scared, they pick relief over truth." Elena felt tears rise, not from sadness alone, but from recognition. Her brain wanted relief so badly it hurt. Relief meant signing. Relief meant performing. Relief meant survival today. Truth meant risk, delay, uncertainty, things her life rarely allowed. Elena checked her email and saw a message from her employer asking her to come in early tomorrow. The subject line was concern. That single word felt like a trap door. Concern could mean compassion or accusation, depending on who held it. Elena's heart raced, and she imagined being asked to take time off until things cooled down. Time off meant no paycheck. No paycheck meant court. Court meant Liam. The chain formed instantly in her mind, each link tightening the next. That was how pressure worked. It made the future feel like a collapsing hallway. Jonah opened his notebook and wrote down the names he remembered. Marla, Dana, the center's address, the flyer date. He wrote as if building a lifeboat out of ink. Elena watched, and something inside her shifted. Jonah wasn't offering heroic speeches. He was offering structure. In a world trying to erase her credibility, he was preserving it. Elena realized how rare that was. Someone taking her reality seriously without asking her to entertain them with it. Her shoulders dropped a fraction, like a body releasing a held breath. Liam returned holding a book about a lighthouse. He placed it on the table and said, "This one keeps ships safe." Elena smiled despite herself. The metaphor hit her gently, almost cruelly. She wanted to be that lighthouse for her son, steady, visible, guiding. But lighthouses also got attacked by storms. Jonah looked at the cover and said, almost to himself, "Light can warn people. It can also expose them." Elena felt a chill because she knew that was exactly what Marla was using. Elena's phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown account. "We can make this go away," it read. "Meet tomorrow. Bring the autistic guy. Be grateful on camera." Elena stared at the words until they blurred. They weren't just attacking her, they were directing her. Jonah read the message over her shoulder and went very still, like his whole body had become a single focused point. Elena whispered, "They want you there." Jonah's eyes lifted to hers, and in them was a quiet dread. Not of cameras, but of what cameras could turn him into. Elena didn't answer the message. Silence felt safer than the wrong words on the wrong day. Still, her brain kept running simulations, as if rehearsing could prevent pain. If she refused, the posts might spread. If she agreed, she might hand them better footage. Either way, her life was now a stage she never auditioned for. She stared at Jonah's hands, still trembling slightly, and wondered what it cost him to even sit in public beside her. Jonah asked to walk her home, not as a romantic gesture, but as a practical one. Elena agreed, grateful for the extra pair of eyes, even if she hated needing them. Outside, the sky looked washed out, like the city had been rinsed of color. Elena felt watched, then hated herself for it, because paranoia and intuition wore the same clothes. Jonah's gaze moved in quick sweeps, cataloging cars, faces, recurring details. His mind didn't relax. It organized. At the corner, a billboard showed a smiling mother and the words, "The right support changes everything." Elena almost laughed. The universe had a cruel sense of timing. Jonah paused and stared at the billboard longer than necessary. "That's their language," he said quietly, and Elena didn't ask how he knew. She already felt it. The same polished optimism, the same implication that if you struggled, you simply hadn't chosen the right savior yet. Elena's stomach tightened. She realized how easily hope could be repackaged into blame. At Elena's building, Jonah stopped before the front steps, as if crossing that line would be too intimate. Elena thanked him and tried to sound normal, like a person with an ordinary day. Jonah nodded, then hesitated. "If they call again," he said, "don't explain yourself. Explanations feed them." Elena understood the psychology. When a person defends, they accept the attacker's frame. She nodded, but the idea felt impossible. Her whole life had been explanations, at work, in court forms, to landlords, to strangers who assumed. That night, Elena couldn't eat. She watched Liam color at the table, his tongue peeking out in concentration, and she felt a sharp guilt for bringing chaos near him. She checked the posts again and saw the clip had been stitched into a new video with dramatic text and sad music, as if her life were a genre. A comment with hundreds of likes read, "Kids deserve stable homes." Elena's hands went cold. Stable. The word returned like a judge, like a door closing. Elena opened her email and reread the message from her employer. "We need to discuss your online presence," it said. Online presence. As if she were a brand, not a cashier trying to survive. She imagined the meeting, her manager's polite disappointment, the corporate script about reputation, the gentle threat of termination. She practiced answers in her head, but every answer sounded like begging. That was the trap. Force dignity to kneel. She looked at Liam and felt a quiet vow forming beneath the fear. When Liam finally slept, Elena called Jonah. She didn't want to, but isolation felt worse. Jonah answered after 2 rings, voice careful. Elena asked him if he could come with her to the meeting at work tomorrow, just to wait outside. She hated asking, hated leaning, but she couldn't shake the thought that the same people who filmed her might show up there too. Jonah was silent for a moment, the kind of silence filled with calculation and sensory dread. Then he said yes, and Elena exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. In the morning, Jonah arrived early, standing across the street from Elena's workplace with his notebook tucked under his arm. He looked out of place, like someone who didn't belong in loud, fluorescent spaces, yet he showed up anyway. Elena felt a strange warmth, gratitude mixed with sorrow that he had to be brave just to exist. As they walked in, Elena spotted a woman near the entrance holding a coffee and a phone, eyes scanning the room too deliberately. The woman glanced at Jonah, then smirked, then typed fast. Elena's manager called her into a small office. Jonah stayed outside, seated stiffly, eyes on the hallway, headphones half on, half off. Elena's manager spoke in a practiced tone about company image and customer comfort. Elena listened, nodding, her mind splitting into 2 tracks, one hearing the words, one watching herself perform calm. Then the manager turned the monitor toward her. On the screen was the same clip from the community center, but now with a new caption. "Local employee involved in charity scam?" Elena's throat closed. The manager asked, "Is this you?" Elena forced herself to answer clearly. Yes, it was her. No, it wasn't a scam. Not hers. She explained the community center had filmed without consent. The manager's expression didn't soften. "Even if that's true," he said, "it's already out there." Elena felt the unfairness like acid. Truth didn't travel as fast as entertainment. She realized her job wasn't asking what happened. It was asking how quickly she could stop being inconvenient. The manager slid a paper across the desk. A leave agreement to sign, unpaid, effective immediately. Elena stared at the paper, seeing her life shrink into ink. Unpaid leave meant rent collapse, court danger, hunger dressed as policy. Her brain flooded with stress hormones, narrowing her choices again, pushing her toward the fastest relief. She almost picked up the pen. Then she remembered Jonah's words. Explanations, feed them. She put the pen down. "I won't sign this," she said, voice thin but steady. The manager's eyes hardened. "Then we may have to terminate," he replied, as if he were reciting weather. Outside, Jonah noticed the woman with the phone step closer to the office door, angling for audio. Jonah stood abruptly, chair scraping, drawing attention. The woman flashed a fake smile. Jonah didn't speak to her. He simply moved between her and the door, not aggressive, just present. Elena's manager opened the door at that exact moment and saw Jonah standing there, tense, different, noticeable. The manager's gaze flicked to Jonah's shaking hands, and Elena saw the judgment form instantly. Unstable. Risk. Problem. Jonah became a liability in one glance, exactly as Marla planned. Elena walked out of the office and saw the scene. Jonah blocking, the woman recording, co-workers staring. Her stomach dropped. The trap had followed her into her workplace, and now it had a new angle. Autistic man causes disturbance. Jonah's breathing quickened, his face tightening as noise and eyes piled on him. Elena wanted to protect him, but she also needed him. The moral knot tightened again. Then Jonah did something unexpected. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his folded note, and read it aloud, slowly, clearly, like a script meant to keep him human. Breathe. Count. Keep going, Jonah said, voice shaking but steadying with each word. The room went quieter, not out of kindness, but out of confusion. The woman's phone remained raised. Elena realized the recording had captured something different than they wanted. Not chaos, but discipline. Not danger, but coping. Jonah looked at Elena, eyes bright with strain, and whispered, "They're collecting clips. We need to collect context." Then Elena's phone buzzed with a new notification, an event invite from the community center titled Public Accountability Night, scheduled for tomorrow, with her name listed as a featured speaker. Elena stared at the invite until her eyes hurt. Public Accountability Night sounded like justice, but it felt like punishment dressed in virtue. Her name listed as a featured speaker meant they weren't asking. They were declaring. The worst part was how official it looked, like the community center had authority to assign her a role in her own humiliation. Jonah watched her face tighten and asked, "Did you consent to that?" Elena shook her head and his silence turned heavy. On the walk home, Elena's phone kept buzzing with reactions. Co-workers asking if she was okay. Strangers sending insults. One message from an unknown number. "Show up tomorrow. Fix this." Elena felt the pull of the crowd, the ancient instinct to regain belonging by complying. Her brain wanted to trade dignity for safety because social exile felt like physical danger. She hated that her nervous system didn't care about principles when it smelled risk. Jonah walked beside her, expression tight, as if holding the world back. Back at the apartment, Elena opened her laptop and searched the event name. It was already being promoted on social media, framed as a community transparency forum about fraud prevention. Her photo, taken from the earlier clip, sat beside the title like a warning label. Jonah leaned in, careful not to crowd her, and began reading comments out loud in a flat voice, stripping them of their sting by turning them into data. Elena listened anyway, because avoiding it didn't stop it from existing. The comments repeated a theme. Protect kids from unstable adults. And that word again, unstable. Elena felt how the label could swallow her life whole. In court, unstable didn't mean cruel. It meant vulnerable, messy, exhausted, human. Jonah wrote the word in his notebook and circled it hard enough to tear the paper. "They're using that word as a lever," he said, voice low. Elena realized he wasn't just observing. He was mapping a system, like someone who'd been forced to study power to survive it. Jonah asked for the links to every post. Elena sent them, hands trembling. Jonah copied dates, usernames, captions, and repeated phrases, noticing clusters that looked coordinated. "These accounts comment within minutes," he murmured. Same tone, same grammar. Elena felt a small shock of hope. If it was coordinated, it could be proven. Her mind reached for certainty the way a drowning person reaches for air. Then dread followed. Proof didn't always matter when people preferred the lie. Elena called the community center's front desk. A cheerful voice answered, then transferred her to Dana without hesitation. Dana sounded delighted, as if Elena had called to RSVP. "We're giving you a chance to clear your name," Dana said. Elena asked how her name got on the flyer. Dana replied, "You're part of the conversation now." Conversation. Elena heard the ownership inside it. Dana added lightly, "Donors want accountability." Elena almost laughed. Donors weren't judges, yet here they were, building a trial. Elena asked if she could simply decline. Dana's tone stayed sweet, while tightening like a knot. "If you don't show," Dana said, "people will assume the worst." Elena's stomach twisted because it was true. Jonah mouthed, "Don't take the bait." Elena inhaled, forced calm, and said she wanted the event's consent and privacy policy in writing. Dana paused, then said, "We'll email it." The line went dead right after, too clean, like a door closing. Minutes later, an email arrived. The consent document was attached as a PDF with the center's logo. Jonah asked Elena not to open it on her laptop. His voice was suddenly urgent. "Could be a tracker," he said. Elena blinked, surprised by the idea, but it fit. Quiet sabotage didn't need violence, only access. Jonah suggested using the library computer later, and Elena agreed, feeling the strange comfort of having a plan. Planning calmed the brain. It made fear feel like a problem, not a prophecy. That night, Elena tucked Liam in and sat beside him longer than usual. Liam asked why she looked sad. Elena told him grown-ups sometimes got misunderstood. Liam frowned, then said, "Like when the teacher thinks I was talking, but I wasn't." Elena nodded, throat tight. He touched her hand and said, "Then you tell the truth." The simplicity hit her like sunlight through cracked blinds. Elena realized she'd been living as if truth were optional, because truth didn't always pay rent, but Liam believed in it like gravity. After Liam slept, Elena and Jonah went back to the library. Jonah chose a computer in view of the desk, as if witnesses mattered. He opened the PDF carefully, then searched for small print clauses. His finger traced lines as he read, lips moving silently. Elena watched his focus, how it narrowed the world until only the pattern remained. Jonah stopped at a paragraph and went still. "This says they can use your likeness in educational materials indefinitely," he said. Elena's skin prickled. Indefinitely meant forever. Jonah clicked another link inside the email, an RSVP form. A new page opened with Elena's name already filled in, along with details she'd never typed. Her address, Liam's school, her employer. Elena felt nausea rise. This wasn't just public shame. It was surveillance disguised as support. Jonah's breathing sped up, but his eyes stayed locked. "They're pulling from data brokers," he whispered, "or someone fed it." Elena realized how small her privacy had been all along, and how easily it could be weaponized. Jonah copied the page source into a text file, moving fast, hands shaking. He wasn't a hacker. He was a man desperate to hold on to reality in a world that kept rewriting it. Elena watched, realizing his noticeable difference, his sensitivity to patterns, was also a kind of shield. Jonah found a hidden field labeled Behavioral Risk Score. Elena's mouth opened, but no words came. She stared at the phrase, thinking of court forms, employers, landlords. A number could become a verdict. Elena whispered, "What is that score?" Jonah didn't answer immediately, because even he seemed afraid of what it meant. He clicked one more tab in the form and revealed a drop-down menu titled Narrative Angle. Options included grateful recipient, uncooperative parent, and, Elena's breath caught, unstable with special needs associate. Jonah's face drained of color. The trap wasn't just against Elena. It had a pre-written role for him too, like a costume waiting in the dark. Jonah closed the browser too quickly, like slamming a lid on something alive. He looked at Elena with a hard clarity that felt new. "If we go tomorrow," he said, "we don't go to defend ourselves. We go to expose the script." Elena felt fear and relief collide, because exposure meant risk, but staying silent meant being edited forever. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown message, with a photo taken through her apartment window showing Liam at the table earlier. The caption read, "We know what you care about most." The photo made Elena's blood turn to ice. No threats, no weapons, just proof that someone could reach into her home with a lens. She stared at Liam's small shape in the image and felt the primal switch flip. Protect, protect, protect. Jonah's face tightened, not with panic, but with controlled alarm, like a fire contained behind glass. Elena wanted to call the police, then imagined the shrug. It's just a picture. The cruelty of modern harm was its deniability. Jonah asked her to screenshot everything and send it to a new email account he helped her create. His hands shook as he spoke, but his voice stayed steady.
Structure first, emotion later. That discipline felt like a rope. They didn't sleep much. Elena sat by Liam's door like a guard, listening to pipes knock and distant TVs laugh. Every sound became a question. Jonah stayed on speakerphone for hours, saying little, just present. Presence mattered. The brain calmed when it wasn't alone. Near dawn, Elena finally made a decision. She would go to the event. Not to beg, not to perform, to take her story back.
She hated how her courage arrived only when fear became unbearable, but maybe that was how courage always worked. Jonah said they needed allies, not an audience. Elena thought of her neighbor, Mrs. Hart, who once brought soup without asking questions. She knocked softly. Mrs. Hart opened the door in slippers, eyes sleepy but kind. Elena showed her the photo. The older woman's expression hardened in a way Elena hadn't expected. "That's not charity," Mrs. Hart said. "That's hunting." She offered to watch Liam during the event. Elena hesitated. Trust was risky, but bringing Liam was worse. Elena nodded, and relief hurt. At the community center that evening, the parking lot was full. Not families seeking help, people seeking spectacle. A banner promised transparency. Phones were already raised. Elena's stomach clenched, but Jonah walked beside her, headphones in, notebook in hand. He looked like someone walking into a storm with a map no one else could read. Inside, chairs faced a small stage. Dana greeted people like a host, smiling too brightly. Marla hovered near the front, scanning the room as if counting. Eleanor noticed a local reporter, microphone ready, eyes hungry for a clean narrative. Jonah whispered, "They're here for emotion, not facts." Elena swallowed. She would have to give them both. Dana called Elena's name with practiced warmth. Applause scattered, uneven, like people clapping for a stranger's pain. Elena stepped forward, and the lights hit her face, not hot, but exposing. She saw the phones. She saw the comments forming before she spoke. Her brain screamed to flee. Then she remembered Liam's hand on hers. Dana began with a question that sounded fair. "Why did you refuse to cooperate?" Elena opened her mouth, but Jonah touched her elbow lightly. Permission, not control. He leaned toward the microphone and asked one quiet question. "Why was there a behavioral risk score field in your RSVP form?" A ripple moved through the room. Dana blinked. For a fraction of a second, the host mask slipped. "I don't know what you mean," she said, laughing. Jonah didn't raise his voice. He simply held up printed screenshots from the library, the words large enough to read. "Narrative angle," he said, and the room fell into a sharper silence, the kind that meant attention. Marla stepped forward quickly, tone soothing. "This is being misunderstood," she said. Jonah's hands trembled, but he kept them visible, palms open. "Misunderstood by who?" he asked. "The people you pre-labeled?" Elena watched faces change. Confusion, curiosity. The brain hated incongruence. It leaned in. A man in the front row raised his phone higher, whispering, "This is crazy." Elena realized the story was turning, not because people became good, but because the pattern had become interesting. Jonah's reaction wasn't a meltdown. It was clarity. and clarity made their script look cheap. Dana's smile tightened like a snapped thread. Elena finally spoke. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She said, slowly, that her child's school and her employer were on the form before she typed anything. A few heads turned toward Dana. The reporter's eyes narrowed. Marla's lips pressed into a line. Elena felt a small, dangerous hope. They might not control this room anymore. Then Dana lifted her tablet and said too calmly, "We can pull up the original footage." The screen behind them flickered to life. Elena's stomach dropped as a video file loaded, labeled with her name, and she realized they still had one weapon left: editing. The first frame froze on Jonah's shaking hands, zoomed in, and the room leaned forward. The zoomed-in frame tried to turn Jonah's tremor into a verdict. A few people shifted uncomfortably, and Elena felt the old fear surge. This was how they did it, by shrinking a human being to a symptom. Dana's voice stayed smooth. "We have to talk about safety," she said, letting the word hang as if it explained everything. Jonah's throat worked as he swallowed, his nervous system bracing for the room to choose the easiest story. Elena's hands clenched, because she could almost feel custody papers rustling in the background of her life. Before the video could play, Jonah lifted one finger, not to interrupt rudely, but to request order. The gesture was small, yet it changed the air. "If you're showing footage," he said, "show the full timeline." Dana smiled. "This is the relevant part," she replied. Jonah nodded once, like he'd expected that answer. Then he did something the room wasn't prepared for. He asked the audience for a simple favor. "Would you watch your own life only in cut clips?" Silence followed, because the question forced people to imagine themselves inside the trap. Dana clicked play anyway. The video rolled, edited tight. Elena's anxious face, Jonah flinching under the ring light, a volunteer's voice saying, "Calm down," even though Jonah hadn't raised his voice. The edit was a cage built from angles, but Jonah didn't argue with emotion. He used sequence. He stepped closer to the screen and pointed to the timestamp in the corner. "Now compare that," he said, holding up his printed screenshot of the RSVP form's timestamp. The numbers didn't match the narrative. The room leaned in again, attention snagged by inconsistency. The reporter raised his microphone slightly, like a shark sensing blood. Dana's smile tightened as she said, "Those screenshots could be fake." Jonah didn't flinch at the accusation. He looked at the audience and asked, "Then why does your form include a field called narrative angle?" He spoke the words slowly so they landed. Elena watched faces change again. People didn't like being used, even when they enjoyed using others. The brain hated realizing it had been guided. Disgust began to replace amusement. Marla stepped forward, voice soft, hands open, the posture of a mediator. "Let's not villainize a program that helps families," she said. Jonah's eyes flicked to her lanyard again. "Read your badge," he said gently. Marla froze for half a breath. "It's turned," she replied, laughing. Jonah's voice stayed calm. "Turn it forward." The request was harmless, yet Marla's hesitation made it loud. Elena felt the room register it like a skipped heartbeat. Marla turned the badge slowly. The name printed there wasn't Marla. It was Morgan. A few gasps fluttered through the chairs. Elena felt a cold clarity spread in her chest. Even the kindness had been a costume. Dana jumped in quickly, saying people used preferred names all the time. Jonah nodded, as if conceding, then asked, "Then why did the voicemail signature say Marla, Director of Outreach, when this badge says Contracted Media Liaison?" The phrase contracted media turned the room colder. Help was one thing. Media was another. Dana's eyes flashed irritation. "This is going off track," she snapped, then smoothed her voice again. Elena realized the most revealing moments weren't what they said, but how fast their warmth disappeared when control slipped. Jonah's hands shook harder now, his body paying the price for staying composed. He reached into his pocket and unfolded his small note. Elena worried he was about to retreat into coping and that the crowd would misread it. Instead, Jonah held the note up so everyone could see it. "This is what you tried to turn into unsafe," he said. He read it aloud, slowly. "Breathe. Count. Keep going." The words sounded simple, almost childlike, and that was the point. Coping wasn't scary. It was responsible. Elena saw a woman in the third row wipe her eye quickly, embarrassed by her own empathy. Jonah continued, voice steadier now, and explained what sensory overload felt like, without asking for pity, only accuracy. The room listened, because the brain locks onto honest detail. It recognized truth the way skin recognizes heat. Dana tried to regain the narrative. She gestured to Elena. "And what about her?" she asked, voice sharpened. "She refused intake. She walked out." Elena felt her stomach twist, then loosen as something in her settled. She stepped forward and spoke about the hidden fields, the pre-filled data, the custody-shaped language, public perception risk, and how it targeted fear, not fraud. She didn't accuse wildly. She described. Description was harder to dismiss than outrage. The reporter's eyebrows lifted higher with each detail. A murmur spread, people repeating phrases to each other, behavioral risk score, narrative angle, as if saying them out loud made them real. Dana looked toward the back of the room, signaling someone unseen. The screen behind them switched to a new slide. Partner organizations. Logos appeared. Real local businesses, a family law firm, even Elena's employer's logo. Elena's knees went weak. It wasn't just a community center stunt. It was a network. She understood the real danger now. They could ruin her quietly, everywhere, at once. Jonah's gaze locked on the law firm logo. He whispered to Elena, "That's why they wanted your child's school." Elena felt sick, imagining systems talking to each other. Employers, partners, courts, each one sharing a hint, a suspicion, a label. Dana saw Elena's reaction and smiled like she'd landed the final blow. "We all want what's best for children," Dana said softly, weaponizing virtue. Elena heard the implied threat, cooperate or be seen as the opposite of best. Jonah took a breath that looked painful. Then he did the one thing they couldn't plan for. He asked the audience to do something simple and public. "If you're recording," he said, "record this screen too. Record the logos. Record the slide number. Save it." Phones lifted, not to mock Elena, but to document the program. Dana's face tightened. The crowd's attention had flipped from consuming a story to preserving evidence. Elena felt a tremor of hope so sharp it almost hurt. Dana stepped toward the tablet, fingers moving fast, trying to change slides to regain control. But the room was already filming. Jonah's voice stayed quiet as he added, "And ask yourselves why a support program needs a behavioral risk score." The question hung in the air, sticky and unforgettable. Then the projector suddenly went black. The lights flickered. Someone had cut the feed. In the darkness, Elena heard Marla, Morgan, say close to Dana, not quite whispering, "We need to move them to the back office now." If this story made your chest tighten even once, it's because too many people live one bad label away from losing everything they love, just like Elena fighting to keep her son, and Jonah fighting to be seen as human instead of a headline. If you want more stories that expose silent cruelty and protect the ones the world tries to shrink, hit subscribe and stay with this channel. Leave your like so this message reaches someone who needs it, and write in the comments below. Have you ever been judged by a clip, a rumor, or a moment taken out of context? And what would you have done in Elena and Jonah's place?